Welcome to Lecture 5 of Classical Greece. Today we're going to be talking specifically about Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic culture. So make sure you are having Lecture 5 notes worksheet available as we go forward. I will try and speak clearly so everybody can understand, but I do encourage you to use the pause button and review any materials you might have missed if I was going a little too fast for you. As always, if you have any questions concerning the lecture, please let Mr. Vincent know, and we'll get those questions cleared up right away. So let's get started. Alexander the Great, setting the stage. Macedonia is located in the northern part of Greece, and it has a rough terrain and a very cold climate. The people that lived up there were in mountain villages instead of city-states, and many Macedonians thought of themselves as Greeks. However, the Greeks looked down upon them as uncivilized foreigners. Philip II of Macedonia was the ruler of Macedonia during this time period of about 60 years after the fall of Greece to the Spartans. Philip II was the leader, and he actually was the father of Alexander. Here's kind of a map of what we're talking about. It's a little zoomed in map so you can kind of see the relation between the entirety of Greece and Macedonia. Just to put things into perspective here, as you can see, down here we got Athens, which is what we've been spending a lot of time talking about. Down here would be Sparta. They call it Sparta in this particular picture. But to the north here we have the Macedonian territory. As you can see, it's a much larger territory of scattered people as compared to the city-states of Athens or Sparta. So, Philip II of Macedonia became the leader in 359 BC at the ripe young age of 23. Once he became king, he started training the peasants to be professional army, which consisted of a unit of phalanx, which is a group of 16 men by 16, which means 16 across and 16 deep of men. Each soldier carried an 18-foot pike, just a long stick with a point on the end. What made them special is that these guys were trained to be a fast-moving cavalry, or soldiers on horseback. So as the picture depicts, you've got soldiers in this particular one that are on the off their horses, but you can get an idea of with these long, huge pikes, you can do a lot of damage from a distance, thereby protecting your army but injuring the enemy. One thing that Philip did was he invaded Greece, not to destroy it or to enslave the Greeks. His purpose was he was getting nervous. Athens and the Spartans were getting a little too big, a little too powerful, and when that happens, they get a little nervous. So Philip wanted to put them in their place before Athens or Sparta tried to attack them, or the rest of Greece tried to attack them. So he felt he had to start first. The Battle of Chaeronea. Athens and Thebes ended up joining forces to fight Philip's army. Athens and Thebes had realized that Philip was getting ready to mount an attack, so they created a small alliance to try and hold them off. However, they realized that Philip's army was too powerful, and Philip ends up defeating the Greeks. This thereby ends Greek independence, and Philip has complete control over Greece. Philip, however, was not satisfied with simply controlling Greece or Thebes. He had his eyes set to defeat the mighty Persian Empire, but he won't. Prior to his plan, or getting his plan in motion, Philip was stabbed to death in 336 BC. Unfortunately, it was at his daughter's wedding by one of his aides. and we move on to Alexander. Here's kind of a little picture of the upcoming movie Alexander. You might recognize some of these faces. I'm looking forward to see it when it comes out. This is a simple picture of Alexander the Great. If you want to get more information on this picture, there is a link to the picture elsewhere on the website under the Pictures tab on the SOC site. But this is kind of a depiction of what he looked like way back in the day. So, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great takes over for his father at the young age of 20, after his father had died. As we learned in the last lecture, Alexander was taught by Aristotle, and he learned science, geography, and literature. What he really enjoyed, though, was the Homer's description of the heroic deeds of Achilles during the Trojan Wars. He was a big Achilles fan. He was into the heroism, the honor, the glory. In the end, as he begins his conquest of the Persian Empire, he ends up killing killed 6,000 Thebians in a rebellion. The cruelty frightened the other Greeks into accepting Alexander as their leader. So there was an uprising, and Alexander quickly put a stop to it. Once he put that stop, the rest of Greece said, okay, he's our king, he's our rightful king, we're not going to mess with him anymore. Even though his dad is dead, we're going to recognize Alexander as our king. So, Alexander goes on to continue the work that his father started. Philip wanted to conquer the Persians, but he never had the chance. So instead, once Alexander takes over, Alexander leads 35,000 troops into Anatolia, which is in present-day Turkey. He met 40,000 Persians at the Granchius River, and Alexander's army attacked first and was victorious. He was able to realize that even though the army at the Granchius River, the Persians, outnumbered Alexander's army, he was able to take advantage of a weakness in their formation. So instead of the typical stay back and defend and push your way towards, what ended up happening was Alexander found a thin area in the line and charged at him and just plowed right through this part of the line, circled around the backside, and started chasing their leader, Darius III. Darius III ends up responding with an army of 50 to 75,000 troops. However, the Macedonians break through the weak point, and Darius III flees. As a result, Alexander has control of Anatolia. Moving on to Egypt. In 332 BC, Alexander marches into Persian-controlled Egypt. He is welcomed by the Egyptians as a liberator and crowned pharaoh. As a result, Alexander now has control over Egypt. Let's move on. He's going to Mesopotamia now. At the Battle of Gamala, 250,000 Persians under the rule of Darius III still exists. Alexander launched a massive phalanx attack, followed by a cavalry charge, and the Persians' line crumbled. Again, Darius III could not hold back Alexander the Great. And again, Darius III flees the battle. The result of this battle is that Alexander has control of all of the Persian Empire. This image here, we see what the result was of Alexander's empire. He started way over here in Macedonia, conquering Thrace, if you remember from the first part of our notes, right below it, and then moves on. He moves on to take Anatolia. He moves on down here into present-day Israel and takes over Egypt. Comes back up and starts going into these areas here, winning battle after battle, meeting up with Darius and making him run away. Other conquests. He travels east to India and finds Darius III had been murdered. Soldiers were exhausted after this 11-year war of Alexander's. And after 11,000 miles, they go to turn back home. Alexander did not want to stop, but his men were getting really testy and really anxious to get home to their families. So he finally caved in and said, okay, we're done. However, on the way home, Alexander gets sick and dies 3 days later from an illness at the age of 32. Obviously very young. So in the 12 years that he controlled the army of Macedonia and Greece, he was able to take over this entire region in 12 years between the ages of 20 and 32. That's pretty impressive. His legacy. After he died, his empire was broken up into 3 main territories. These territories would end up lasting for centuries. After his death, it became known as the Hellenistic era. Hellenistic culture was a blending of Egyptian, Persian, Greek, and Indian influences. It would forever transform Greece and Asia. What happened after Alexander's death was Alexander did not want to he did not want to control these areas as much as he wanted to conquer these areas. He wanted to take over the land, but not necessarily lead them. So he was able to entrust certain people to keep the peace among those regions. But he did not want to stay there and lead or be the governor of those regions. As time went by, Alexander died, and his army started splitting up. His generals split up into 3 groups, and they started mixing the Macedonian and the Greeks cultures, who were the soldiers, with the cultures that were already in the region, in India and the surrounding Middle Eastern areas. This culture became known as the Hellenistic culture, these blendings of the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Persians. During this time, the city of Alexandria was created, which is in the north tip of Egypt. Alexandria is no longer there. However, we do know it used to be there based on documents or readings and stories and archaeological finds. Alexandria obviously was named after Alexander the Great. When it was around, it was the center for trade. There was a 350-foot lighthouse. It was the first ever lighthouse built, used for the purpose of trade. If you're sitting on a boat in the Mediterranean Sea on the north, and you see this big light, naturally people are going to want to know what that is. It was kind of a beacon to get people to come to the city and do their trade and see how awesome this place was. Besides the lighthouse in Alexandria, there is also a library with over 250,000 scrolls. Alexandria becomes a commodity, a learning commodity. Biggest library, the first real library in the world back then for people to come and learn. Big deal. Unfortunately, all this knowledge was lost later on in other wars. Besides the library, we have other things that came out of this Hellenistic period, such as different evolutions of science and technology. Euclid, for example, was a mathematician. He came up with the elements for geometry. Okay, for those of you that take geometry now in school, you're probably studying Euclidean geometry. This is the guy that came up with it. Another guy by the name of Archimedes, another scientist. He was able to come up with the mathematical figure of pi. You know, 3.14. That's the answer for that, by the way. So, as you know, if you took geometry or doing any type of that type of math, 3.14 is used to help figure out the different parts of a circle, whether it's the diameter, the volume, the circumference, so on and so forth. Archimedes came up with that number during this time period. Finally, a guy by the name of Hero would come up with this idea of using steam power, being able to burn wood, create steam, or burn water, create steam, and use that steam as a type of energy. All these new ideas. And as a result of all this, through Philip II and Alexander's conquest of the Greeks, Egyptians and Persians, ideas would spread and cultures would combine in a way that had never been seen before. After Alexander's death, the Greek civilization would gradually decline until many of their achievements and ideas would be absorbed into perhaps the greatest example of Hellenism in history, the Roman Empire, which is where I will leave you today. We will get into the Roman Empire next lesson, or sorry, our next unit, after our break, semester break. I hope you enjoyed Unit 5. There's a lot to learn about the Greeks. Again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact Mr. Vincent, and he'll be more than happy to help you. Again, I encourage you to also check the SLC website to look at some of the additional information that has been put there to help you get some more understanding of things not talked about during these lessons. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later.